Hey guys, this is Chris Jones. Welcome to episode, lucky number 13 of Beyond Local. These next couple podcasts, here's what we're going to do. We brought in our Director of Operations and Client Services, Steve Blackburn. You guys have met Steve from previous podcasts. But we brought Steve in because we want to do a series of podcasts to help the buyer, really the clients, the prospective clients, think through the process of selecting the proper agency. And today we're going to explore 5 tips that you put together in a recent blog article on LSEO to choose the best SEO agency. So, the interesting thing about this is that, as an agency, as an SEO agency, we have to think through the types of keywords that people type into Google to find us. And ultimately, I'm guessing that through that process, you've thought through really the questions that those clients really need to get answered. So let's dive through this idea, this blog article that you wrote on the lseo.com blog. So first, you talk about this idea of how important it is to go into this important decision of selecting an SEO agency with clearly defined goals.
Well, right. I mean, if you don't have goals, how can you measure your outcome? And there are so many metrics that any agency can throw at you, or for that matter of fact, there's anybody who is on the internet now can say, hey, I can do SEO. So you as a business owner, what's going to drive your success? If your success is, I want people to spend more time on my page, well, I don't care about how much more organic traffic you send me. I want session duration. It might be, hey, I want more keywords, or I've got money terms, and I want to rank higher on those keywords to, start outbidding my competition.
Does this goals talk to the idea of the book that I'm not sure if you read it, but it's called Measure What Matters. And so logically, if I'm a business, I care most about new customers, revenue, as it relates to SEO. Some folks that might be looking, do they need to self-educate and understand some of the key performance indicators of SEO, like, the keywords that your website ranks for in the top 10, the total number of keywords for your website? Or do you think it's okay that they go into looking for an SEO agency just with the goal of, hey, I want to make more revenue, want to generate more transactions? Or do they need to self-educate going into it?
Well, I think there's a fine line, and I think it's a hybrid. You don't need to become an SEO. I want you, if you're a physical therapist, to, work on physical therapy and make sure that you're sharpening your craft there. I don't expect you to understand what schema markup is or anything like that. At the same time, you've got to have a little bit of an idea of what some of the buzzwords are. You have to understand what a keyword is. You have to know that there are things like metadata. You don't have to understand what they are, but at the same time, it helps you to self-educate a little bit because, again, there are so many metrics and there are so many fantastic SEO companies out there. I mean, I work for one. I'm friends with a lot of peers that work, through the industry at others. And at the same time, there's a lot of companies out there that just prey on people who don't understand the metrics. And again, that's why it's, to your point, measure what matters. Because if it's just, hey, I'll send you organic traffic, or I'll send you sessions, or I'll lower your bounce rate, that's all well and good to a certain extent. But if they're not my business goals, that doesn't help me. If you want to extend my session duration, that might not be the best for an e-com company. What do I want to see? I want to see people get to the thank you page or the cart page or the my account page to log back in. So I think it's important that clients at least understand the basics of it, but then really dive in with their company, whatever agency they're choosing, before they put their John Hancock on the bottom of a proposal. So I think that there's a hybrid there.
So for the agencies watching, if I could just give some quick feedback, having been in the industry for over 20 years, is measure what matters. You need to know what matters to the client that is contacting you because they're looking for help with SEO. And I think that part of our culture, one of our core values at LSEO is this idea that our client success is our success. And one of the things that I'm actually really proud of having infused in all of my companies, and LSEO as an example, is an entrepreneurial mindset where, for me, whenever I'm involved in a sales call in the beginning, candidly, what I care most about is how they're going to measure success. Because you even heard me nerd out a little bit. I know what the KPIs are for SEO, and I know that all they really are leading indicators of potentially accomplishing the goal which the client wants, which is what they're trying to measure. So for agencies out there, put on that entrepreneurial mindset, spend the extra time in the discovery phase with the client, really trying to get at what it is that they're going to measure and evaluate your success. And by the way, isn't there like a 5 why rule? And so, like when you ask somebody a question and they give you an answer and then you say why. They give you an answer and then you say why. And then by the 4th or 5th, you actually get the right answer. Try that potentially. So, all right, Steve Blackburn, his number 1 tip is to clearly define your goals. Number 2, you talk about, let's call it social proof, but can you go a little bit more into detail about how you outline the importance of accomplishments?
Yeah. There's that old saying, the proof is in the pudding. Well, let's find the proof before we even pick out what flavor of pudding that we're going to make here. And it's not that difficult. I mean, if you go to any reputable agency, they're going to have a page on their website that says testimonials or case studies or things like that. And most of the time, they're going to work with some really great brands who also want that recognition, and they're going to share and say, hey, yeah, we don't mind. You've really kicked butt for us. We don't mind if you share your story here. So they're going to have testimonials on their website. They're going to have case studies. Companies like us are lucky enough that, we've been up and recognized for industry awards, U.S. Search Awards, Landies, etc. And then there's the review process. If I go to a new city and I want to go out to dinner that night, I'm going to Google, best pizza in, city X. Well, I'm going to get, Google's going to come up. I'm going to get Facebook to come up. But in our industry, there's this really, really, really cool directory called Clutch. And it's specifically for, I don't want to say SEO because there's SEM and web dev on there, but it's, technology-based companies that more savvy users can go to, and it's clutch.co, and you're able to see what people say about companies, and it's from really savvy users. So it's not like getting a review on Amazon where someone says 1-star review because the batteries they put it in it didn't work. So it's a really good comprehensive directory of digital marketing agencies.
But in full transparency, and the folks at Clutch are friends of ours, it is pay for play.
Oh, yes.
At the end of the day, they rank for a lot of the top keywords that any SEO agency would want to rank for. But just so the buyer knows that once they go into that page, the default is sponsored. And I believe at least 30 to 50 of the results, so ranking 1 through 50 is all pay for play. The person in position 1 and 2 is paying a heck of a lot more than position 3 and 4. So, and again, in full transparency, just so folks know, that top position probably goes for about $15,000 a month. So it's a company called Straight North, and for for people that are looking at Straight North, it's awesome, probably a great agency. But just so you see them in the number 1 position, and they're paying for it. So, but to your point, the social proof matters. And my quick question for you here is, and we're going to get to your next tip around budgeting, but a lot of the leads that we see are very budget conscious. And so they fall prey to the person who hasn't established themselves yet. So they may have just recently hung their shingle as an SEO, quote unquote, professional, and they're less expensive, they're cheaper. Do you think that a lack of credentials disqualifies the person? Would you recommend against a client going with them until they have established themselves?
See, that's hard to say because at one point we were all brand new at this, and we had a drive, we had a passion, we had a hunger. But at the same time, if I, needed orthopedic surgery, I'd rather go to Dr. James Andrews than, to a resident. So I think that let somebody make mistakes on someone else's account, not yours. While this industry changes all the time, and I've made mistakes on accounts, I'm sure that you have over your 20-year career, but I definitely think that going with a firm that has that reputation, it's that warm, fuzzy feeling. You're a bit safer.
And being that I've gotten to work with you over this last year, I could tell you that. Well, I could tell folks that are watching that not all agencies have the same ethos around client services. They put a lot more energy into sales acquisition than they do in making the client happy. And I think that what you've done at LSEO, really establishing that almost should be a sixth tip. Like, look for an agency that takes client services seriously, not just going to win you over in the sales romance, but are going to have someone like you and your team to be able to serve them. You don't have to respond to that, but I think that's an important point. So we talked about social proof and validation. You mentioned the proof is in the pudding. We could have said that, on some level, you get what you pay for, right?
Right.
That's a nice way of saying it. Talk to me about budget. This is always one of the most, particularly for SMBs, one of the most difficult things, because a lot of folks will come and say, I don't really have the money, or they'll say, can you do it on a performance contingency basis? But how did you think about budget as it relates to the article you wrote?
Well, I think budget for digital marketing just needs to be a part of your overall marketing budget. I mean, if you're a business owner, you've got a budget, whether it's whatever you can spend. I can allocate so much for payroll. I can allocate so much for rent. I can allocate so much for the lights, the water, etc. I mean, you're a serial entrepreneur. You've got serial bills then as well. I mean, they're always coming. So you have to budget. Well, you have to now carve out a budget for marketing. Otherwise, how are you going to get your product or your service in front of people?
And how else are you going to grow?
Well, correct.
A lot of businesses struggle with growth. They could maintain, the example I give is like somebody jumps into a pool, a 10-foot pool, and they're only 6 foot, and they have a weight on their ankle. So they're constantly just trying to get air. The way that you grow is by investing. And if you don't invest roughly 10 to 15% of your top line revenue back into growth, you'll always be at that point of stagnation, or that metaphor of jumping in the water with something trying to pull you down, because client attrition, among other things, will just keep pulling at you no matter how good you are. Continue.
Well, I think that it's important to set that budget apart, but it's got to be something that you can afford. I don't want you to come to me and to your point, 10 to 15%, hey, that's great. It can't be 50, because then we're talking about payroll and not being able to pay other bills. And if it comes down to it, if the choice is I've got to make payroll or I've got to make my marketing budget, well, you're probably going to have to pay your payroll. Although someone like me might tell you, if you don't pay that marketing budget, you're going to have a payroll problem 3 months from now or whenever.
Awesome. So setting a budget, going into it with that in mind, for folks that are in the market for an SEO agency, do your research ahead of time. In my opinion, this idea of what do you charge is the wrong question. That is not what you're trying to validate. Price is relative to performance. If you check the boxes on performance, price is kind of irrelevant. So you have to go in there knowing how much you're willing to spend. You have to go in there knowing how you're going to measure performance and what performance means to you. We won't dive into all those details to respect the time of the podcast, but budget means it ties right into your tip number 1 around setting goals. It really needs to tie into your performance. Because if I said to you, I would ask you as the client, what's the value? What's the lifetime customer value of a new customer? And if you told me, $5,000, why in the world are we haggling over the fact that a new lead costs $250, right? It's the wrong approach. If I could say this too, and this is terribly controversial, but I've been saying this for most of my career, it's the entrepreneurial blood in me. I understand why organizations budget, but budgets put caps and restrictions on the potentiality of breakout performance. It's the way that the ad platforms work, etc. I think a mindset of performance and understanding your customer acquisition cost, understanding your lifetime customer value, these you could put together mathematical formulas that really give you a sense of how much you could pay for a lead. So, love your tips here. Fourth, you talk about this idea of getting to know the prospective SEO agencies by setting a consultation.
Right. Again, I'm going to go back to if you needed legal services, you would call and say, hey, I have problem X. Mr. Attorney, can you help me? And they would normally say, hey, why don't you come down to the office? Let's talk about this. Let's get to know each other. Well, you should do the same thing with your SEO company, because the first time you called them, you're probably going to talk to somebody in sales. That's their job, is to answer the phone call, take that lead, try to convert them into a customer. But I would go the next step. When you're requesting that consultation, don't have it with just the sales team. Ask them, hey, can I get somebody from the fulfillment side to join the call? And can I get someone from let me back that up. Do you have someone who handles client services or a team that does? And can I talk to them as well? I mean, we're fortunate that we do. Not all agencies do. But if they do, well, you want to get everybody on the phone, because you want to hear, how am I going to be communicated with? How often? How does the communication come? And then also what I recommend is every question that you asked the salesman, ask again, because now the fulfillment team's on the call. Because again, I'm not going to say that salesmen are trying to do shady things or anything like that, but alignment's important. So let's get the guessing game out of it. So if it's, hey, how do you think you can move this keyword? Or how do we expect to increase page duration? Or how many, whatever metric it is that you already, because you started off with clearly defining your goals. So you ask the salesman that. Well, now that a guy from the SEO team or a girl from the SEO team's on the call, ask again. Let's ask the people that do the work. And then it's also really nice to if they're lucky enough to have someone in client services or a team there, to get to know the person you're going to be talking with. Because, I mean, you want to like that person. So it's nice to get that soft intro before any paperwork's signed and anybody's paying any money or anything like that.
Okay, we're going into the home stretch here. So Steve wrote an article on the SEO blog, 5 tips to choose the best SEO agency. Tip number 1, clearly define your SEO goals. Tip number 2, check awards, case studies, reviews, and testimonials, basically social proof and validation. Buyer beware, you get what you pay for. Third is setting a budget and making sure that budget ties into your performance evaluation and measuring what it is that you're looking to drive for your business. Number 4 is schedule a consultation. Final one, get a proposal and understand it completely. Why does this matter?
Well, that matters because there's a handful of different ways that this industry can work. It can either be monthly retainer, which is probably the most common. You sign a 6-month, 12-month, 24, whatever your contract is, you sign that. Or it can be project-based. You may have an audit. Or it can be hourly based. So you've got to know what you just got yourself into, for starters. Secondly, you've got to know, well, how much am I paying? How am I paying it? Because let's say it is a project-based. Am I paying everything up front? Am I paying at the completion of the work? Is there some sort of hybrid where I pay a little bit up front? I pay based on milestones. Do I pay half up front, half when it's done? Things like that. And you have to know that. When do I get charged? How do I get charged? Things like that. The other thing that's important is maybe you're doing it on an hourly basis. Well, how do you track your hours? Do I get charged if I have to make a phone call? What are your hourly rates? And finally, what's your cancellation policy? I mean, I want this to work for everyone, whether they're with LSEO or any other company in the world. I want it to work. But if for some reason it doesn't, I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's a lot of bakeries right now that they can have the best marketing in the world, but it's just not going to work out for them, unfortunately. While I want it to, what's their cancellation policy with their company so that they can get out of that contract or agreement, and how? Do you have to give 90 days? Do you have to give 30 days? Is there no cancellation policy? Everybody's a little bit different, and that verbiage isn't always explained to you by the salesman. Make sure you read your contract, your proposal, because at the end of the day, you put your signature on it, you're responsible for it.
What's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you?
The easiest way for people to get in touch with me is just go to our website, dial the phone number that comes up and click for existing client. Unfortunately, I don't get the luxury to talk to the new guys. That goes to our sales team. Or if it's our client already, any of them know, go to our email. I don't hide my cell phone numbers right in my email signature. I welcome any and all phone calls from our clients at any time. I'm just here to make people happy.
It's awesome, man. Thank you for your dedication to client services at LSEO.
Well, thanks, Chris.
Absolutely. Guys, we'll see you for the next episode of Beyond Local.